Chapter 8 is about the expression of dissent at work. In other words, speaking up when you're concerned about something. Dissent takes a variety of forms. When we have a concern, maybe we think something's not going right at work, we have a disagreement, maybe we've noticed something that's concerning us in terms of its ethics. Um, we can speak up laterally. That is, we can talk to our coworkers and share our concerns in the hope that the team or the group will listen and can work something out. We can engage in upward dissent. So upward in the sense that we're communicating up the chain or the hierarchy of our organization. Some organizations are very tall in their hierarchies, some are flat, but in almost every organization, there are people who have been invested with power. And when we communicate upward, we're expressing our concerns to people who have more power than we do for whatever reason. Maybe it was given by the organization. Maybe they have a certain technical expertise. In any case, they have influence. And sometimes dissent can be what we call displaced. That's where we share our concerns, but not in the organization, but with people outside. In this case, we're really talking about family members or friends. That's the situation where you sit down with somebody and share what's going on and get their input and maybe vent to them to get the emotion out. We can contrast dissent with whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is taking your concern outside the organization to somebody who can actually do something about it. So a whistleblower might raise a safety concern to a government regulatory agency, for instance, or an ethical concern to a governing body or a community that's affected by what's happening at work. People typically blow the whistle only when they can't find a way to express their concern within the organization. So the expression of dissent is crucial for any number of reasons. Why is it important? Well, most organizations would rather handle these things internally than externally. It's bad for business if your employees need to go to the government or to the community to complain about what you're asking them to do. But also, dissent is a way of getting feedback. When people speak up, organizations learn from their employees. Employees maybe just want to express a better way of doing something or a concern about, a new procedure that's really getting in the way of being effective or productive. Dissent stimulates change at work sometimes if people are open-minded and willing to change. And change can be good. We need to adapt in modern organizations. Dissent is a way of identifying ethical concerns at work, behaviors or policies that are violating core values of employees. And we need to be able to speak up about that. When we can't speak up about things that genuinely concern us, it really wears us down over time. It can eat away at our self-respect. So constructive dissent, the ability to speak up in a constructive way, can be good for us in terms of how we feel about ourselves and about our organization. And we see in an early case study in the chapter, the case of Amir, who speaks up effectively, and his action results in some constructive change that makes the workplace better. Let's look a little bit at the research on dissent, which addresses, what are the different types of dissent? What are the factors that make it risky or less risky? What are some approaches that work and some that maybe don't work so well? We know that in terms of people's willingness to speak up, employees who express constructive dissent are often quite loyal to the organization. Rather than leave the organization, rather than blow the whistle, they want to find a way to be heard to help make the organization better. So dissenters are often committed employees. And we know that the quality of their relationships with peers and especially team leaders and supervisors makes a huge difference. In organizations where that relationship is built on openness and trust, people are more willing to speak up because they don't fear the consequences. They don't fear being blamed because they brought an unpopular message to management. The research tells us that there are better and worse ways of trying to express dissent. In general, we want to express our dissent in a way that's principled rather than just focused on personal advantage. If it appears that you're speaking up just so you will increase your own opportunities to gain resources, for instance, or to get a promotion, right? Or to disadvantage somebody who you view as a competitor at work, your messages are less likely to be responded to positively. Principled dissent means that you are offering a concern because you're seeing something that violates procedures at work, gets in the way of the organization meeting its goals, violates organization's values. So it's not necessarily about you, although, of course, we are always personally involved in these situations. But your argument, your dissent is based on principle, a larger concern than your own narrow interest. These kinds of dissent typically result in less resistance from management and other people. And dissent can be risky because sometimes we are blamed or even retaliated against when we identify things that are wrong, or someone might feel like we're blaming them. When our dissent is based on principle, we're less likely to experience this kind of retaliation or grudge holding. There are lots of things that we focus our dissent on. The research identifies things like rules that just don't seem to apply or kind of dumb, right? Or safety considerations, for instance, or ethical violations, violations of the organization's values or the larger culture's values around things like honesty or safety or protecting the public, right? The case of Lupe identifies a situation where the procedures in place seemed to be unsafe, and Lupe's speaking up made a difference. How to approach dissent? Generally speaking, the research suggests that an approach that is bolstered by evidence and facts. So if you have a concern about something that's going wrong, you think a procedure is making people less effective or is wasting time or resources, if you can have some facts to show, numbers, right? Concrete examples, you're going to be a more effective dissenter, right? Than just offering your sort of personal intuition that something's wrong, right? And even better, if you can present a solution, a better way of doing things, that convinces management that you've really followed through. And to be honest, it makes them easier to correct the situation if there are some good ideas offered along with the dissent. One thing that is even more risky than straight up dissent is going around your boss, circumvention. Sometimes people get frustrated with their immediate supervisor or work group because they're not being heard to. And they have such a level of concern that they decide to go around the person who's supposed to be the first line of response. This is risky because it puts that supervisor themselves at risk. And going to their boss may leave them feeling quite vulnerable. Now, should you not do that? Well, there are times when we simply have to do that, even though it's risky, when something extremely dangerous is happening at work. When we've tried every other option, and the only other option we can think of is to leave the organization, or try a circumvention approach, that can help. But before you try circumvention, you should try other things. Consult with mentors who can advise you on what to do. Try the solution presentation approach. Give the situation some time, right? Talk with other members of your team and get them to join you, perhaps, in going over your supervisor's head if that seems absolutely necessary. The chapter reviews some other factors that can be important in dissent. One of them is technology. We can use technology to actually encourage constructive dissent using software systems that allow people to make suggestions and kind of guide them through a process of creating dissent that feels constructive and involves a solution, right? Our technology, though, sometimes can get us in trouble if we use email or social media simply to vent or blame or call out people in an organization, that will often backfire. So the key is if we use technology, we need to use it to help us form a constructive dissent that has a high likelihood of being taken as principal dissent. We need to build trust if we're going to be dissenting. And we do that by investing in our relationships with coworkers, showing that we have good intentions, helping our bosses see that we are meeting work requirements and doing our very best to be strong employees. And then it's more likely that our dissent will be perceived positively. In general, we have to think about ways to make dissent a safe process. And if we're in a position of being a team lead, right, or a supervisor, uh, we can find ways to reward and encourage people for speaking up, to publicly acknowledge the courage that it takes to speak up in a workplace. Um, and that can increase the likelihood that people will feel comfortable. So, as we end this chapter, think about the application of the RNF model. Attending means paying attention to things like power differences, maybe the history that you have with someone in the past. Have you brought a lot of complaints in the past that in the end didn't seem all that important? Or is this a time when it's really just important that you speak up and maybe a rare time that you've done it? Um, uh, Make sense, the second task. Talk to people around you about your concerns. See if they can help you develop evidence and suggestions, right? Um, Build a coalition of supporters that can get behind you if you need help in expressing the dissent. Then take action. Use one of the constructive approaches that's talked about in the chapter, and probably avoid approaches that put you at unnecessary risk because dissent is risky. It's something that we can feel some fear about because there can be genuine negative consequences if our dissent is not taken seriously or if it's received by somebody who simply isn't open-minded enough to hear what we have to say. Maintenance means on a day-to-day basis, do the relationship work of building trust, right? And if you're a supervisor, put in place the kinds of communication processes that encourage people to speak up early before a problem becomes big. These are some ideas that will help make the expression of dissent less risky for you.